Hey everyone, this video is going to be controversial. Well, no, not really. But after having finished that long video on theming in the 90s that unintentionally took 3 months and turned into a 4-part series, I really just wanted to take a break and do something that was easy to write and required little research, so I thought that this was the perfect excuse to talk about something that I find really annoying. Perhaps this was just me growing up, but I remember in elementary school, teachers would often teach us about the difference between facts and opinions, and that someone's opinion cannot be wrong. Well, I'm here today to tell you that they're wrong, and as someone who has been accused of having bad, uninformed opinions, I think that I'm now an expert in this subject, qualified to speak on its behalf. So here's the thing. There will always be a group of people in any community who have absolutely zero critical thinking skills whatsoever. Now, to be fair, I'm a dunce too, because you might recall the many times that I have been factually incorrect about really simple and obvious things in my videos, and have had to post a list of corrections in the comments. I call that the list of shame. But nothing really bothers me more than people who have absolutely no original thought in their heads, existing only to read bad opinions online and then parrot those same opinions wherever they can. So that brings us to the topic right now, which specifically refers to bad theme park opinions that I'm tired of seeing and hearing, perpetually swirling around us because no one has taken the time to directly address them in any meaningful way. For example, anytime people are pointing out problematic rides or areas of parks, there's always someone who has to chime in and say, well, they should put a roller coaster in there. Why? Why is there always somebody who cannot think of a better idea than just slapping a roller coaster into a building, especially when we're often talking about parks that mostly consist of dark rides and already have decent coasters? Why, in every comment section, is there somebody complaining about Mario Kart and saying that it needed to be a roller coaster? Why is there always somebody saying that Fast and Furious Supercharged needs to become an indoor roller coaster? Like really, right between the Mummy and Gringotts, you want another indoor coaster. Now, to be fair, when Universal Hollywood announced its Fast and Furious coaster that goes up and down the mountainside, the internet did collectively agree that a less themed, thrilling coaster that reuses the Fast and Furious building would probably be a good idea for Universal Studios Florida. In fact, I'm a fan of reviving the idea of the Mount Crumpet roller coaster for Seuss Landing, and I did even propose a time-traveling dinosaur family coaster for Dinoland a while back, so it's not inherently a bad idea when it makes thematic sense. Still, there's always one person who will say some outrageous thing, like that Autopia is a waste of space, and that Disney should put Tron there, without thinking about why that would be logistically impossible, or would be a really poor fit for Disneyland. There's always a bunch of people talking about how Galaxy's Edge needs an X-Wing roller coaster, which again takes absolutely nothing into consideration for why that wouldn't work logistically or thematically. So yeah, maybe I'll get a lot of flack for producing this video, but I'm tired of seeing the same bad, poorly thought out opinions repeated over and over again, and I think it's time to finally address them. Also, if you're ready to see me really dig into these and potentially want to see more, go ahead and leave a like on the video as well. If you've been watching me for a while, then you know that I haven't been the biggest fan of Disney for a long time now. Disney parks have entered a new era where an IP mandate dictates all creative decisions, producing a lot of outrageously expensive rides that somehow feel budget cut to oblivion, and I think are best described as aggressively mediocre. There's certainly a few positives that I've really liked, like Pandora, or weirdly enough, the new Adventureland Treehouse, but otherwise, it is clear to me that Disney is no longer achieving a level of excellence that it once did, at least not since Michael Eisner was the head of the company. Yet despite these less than satisfactory additions, embarrassing cleanliness and maintenance standards, and rising prices among a diminishing product, there is a demographic of people who love the company to an almost unhealthy degree and base their entire personality around ignoring these issues and aggressively attacking others for pointing them out. Well, this video isn't about those people, but rather one specific bad argument that I continue seeing parroted all over the place. I'm speaking specifically about people who like to say, well, Walt always said that Disney shouldn't be a museum. Yeah, like Walt Disney would have been a fan of Bob Iger, who would have thought that a Guardians of the Galaxy roller coaster in Epcot was a good idea. In fairness, Walt probably would have hated Epcot in its original form too, but change for the sake of change is not a positive development. The actual quote from Walt is this: "Disneyland will never be completed. It will continue to grow as long as there is imagination left in the world." The issue with people who often cite Walt to justify negative park changes also ignore the context of when and why Walt is quoted as having said this. If you've ever read up on the construction of Disneyland or have ever seen photos or videos of the early park, then it's clear that it was very unfinished. So many early attractions were placeholders, many lands were incomplete, and entire areas were just dirt or grass. The Matterhorn partially came about because the land it now sits on used to be a pile of excavated dirt. If you're not too familiar with Disneyland history, then you've probably never heard of short-lived placeholder attractions like the Phantom Boats. At one point, there was even 3 versions of Autopia in the same park, so between that and corporate showcases on chemicals, Disneyland had a lot of growing and changing to do. Disneyland was also Walt's personal playground, a place that creatively manifested his personal interests like Main Street USA, but also blue sky ideas like Liberty Street or Edison Square, and many other ideas that either evolved or would have been interesting additions. Disneyland was not a vessel of brand synergy based around Disney Plus metrics analyzing which films young children watched on repeat, but was again a matter of Walt's own passions. I know that people are immediately going to start wondering why the castle from Sleeping Beauty is the icon of the park then, as it was built specifically to tie in with the eventual release of the film. However, the attitude was certainly very different, as many of the hand-drawn animated films during Walt's era were considered laborious works of art, and Sleeping Beauty, trying something different by taking inspiration from actual medieval art, was certainly no exception. As with anything at Disneyland, the castle was a reflection of Walt's own interests and not a soulless corporate product, engineered to hit certain story beats, tropes, and calculated emotional moments in order to create an accessible product meant to get children hooked into some vague, nebulous brand in the heads of the executives. So when Walt was talking about Disneyland never being completed, it's clear that A, there was still a lot that needed to be finished, and B, Walt was a creative person who had many interesting ideas and was excited to see them eventually built. Also, the phrase, "Disneyland is not a museum," is apparently an old slogan from Imagineering, and it obviously doesn't even apply to Walt. So the next time that someone tries to justify a bad creative decision made by the company, replacing a well-liked attraction for some brand-building nonsense, and misquoting Walt Disney in the process, be sure to let them know that they have no idea what they're talking about. Now, in fairness, the theme of the video is bad theme park opinions and not bad arguments, but by misquoting Walt to purposely disregard any criticism of the Disney Corporation, that in itself is essentially a statement of opinion. Another statement that often bothers me is that a lot of people often smugly claim that the original Epcot Center had to demolish most of its old rides because it was outdated and that technology caught up to the present. I'm not really going to address that here because I have an older video that went through all the rides and pretty effectively debunked that statement, as with the exception of Horizons, the majority of them were almost exclusively focused on history, with only vague and optimistic portrayals of the future that were designed to be open to interpretation. However, the same kind of person who claims to remember how outdated the park was is also the same kind of person who makes the argument that Epcot had to change because it was boring and that the rides were always empty. In fairness, a lot of these are real anecdotes, and I have no doubt that they are correct in saying that they walked right onto, World of Motion, but to me, it's clear that there is a lack of understanding for why they were able to do so. While not all of these attractions open with the park, I'll list what I consider to be the classic rides of Epcot. That would be Spaceship Earth, The Living Seas, Listen or Now Living with the Land, Journey into Imagination, which is different than the current much lower capacity version, World of Motion, Horizons, Universe of Energy, El Rio del Tiempo, and finally, Maelstrom. If you've experienced these attractions or know what they were, then you'll certainly recognize that many were omnimovers, but even if they weren't, they were still very high capacity people eaters. I won't break down the math because that would be tedious, and many of these numbers are estimations, but the combined total capacity for all of these attractions is roughly 20,000 people per hour. That means that if there's 20,000 people in the park, then they could all either be in minimal lines or riding something at any given point in the day. Compare that to today's Hollywood Studios, which has a roughly estimated hourly capacity of 14,600, that is, if the rides aren't experiencing major breakdowns. Now to be fair, Hollywood Studios has a handful of high-capacity shows to absorb crowds too, but so did old Epcot, ranging from Kitchen Cabaret, or whatever was occupying the Imagination Theater, to the many indoor theaters around World Showcase, to an abundance of street entertainment. Combine that with Communicore or later Innoventions, as well as all of the interactive exhibits like VisionWorks, or the areas at the end of Spaceship Earth and World of Motion, and you have a park that handled its crowds exceptionally well. It's also not accounting for the sheer size of the park, filled with shops and the explorable World Showcase. Have you ever walked around Epcot recently, feeling that the park was empty, yet being surprised to see that Test Track had an hour-plus wait? The size of the park disperses and absorbs crowds exceptionally well, also leading to the perception that it's empty. So essentially, my point about the older iteration of Epcot is that it was an absolute capacity monster, but this doesn't take into account the reality of park numbers 30 to 40 or even 20 years ago either. Pre-2010, Walt Disney World had a reasonable off-season, and in the first decade of the park, 20,000 people, enough just to fill its rides, was likely abnormal most of the year. Summer could probably consistently see 20 to 25,000 a day, but that was crowded by standards then, and is now considered a lightly moderate crowd today. So not only was the park exceptionally well equipped to handle the expected crowd, it would likely feel empty, but the crowds themselves were also significantly smaller than what is normal by today's standards. Also, how many people claiming that the park was empty were purposely going there during the 8 months of off-season? Clearly, the statement that Epcot needed to change because it wasn't pulling crowds is a bad opinion, because it's based off of a complete lack of understanding for what the crowd expectations were and how the park handled it. While Islands of Adventure is considered by many to be Universal's best park, especially with how strong the attraction lineup is, it does contain some areas that I think are wildly underrated. Seuss Landing is often dismissed as an area for kids, which, true, that is the target demographic, but the Cat in the Hat is really one of the coolest dark rides out there. The other attractions are well needed and well themed capacity for younger park goers, but one of the things that most people miss is just how much detail and hidden secrets are packed into the land if you take the time to look for them. In the same way, Toon Lagoon is another area that people often just walk through, filled with explorable areas, hidden details, and clever gags. The reason that I think it's often dismissed is because it only contains 2 water rides, and while they're pretty well themed, I do think that the appeal is limited, especially because of how malicious they can be when dumping water on you. However, another bad opinion that I continue to see parroted over and over again is that Toon Lagoon needs to be demolished because it's not relevant and that nobody knows who any of the characters are. But you know what? While I see the same exact sentiment pop up on a monthly basis, I never see anyone actually asking anything about the characters. So, with the frequency that people keep insisting that the characters are unknown to the general public, it appears that quite a lot of people actually do. I can't say that I've ever read a Popeye comic strip or watched a full cartoon short featuring the characters, but they still do exist in the American cultural zeitgeist, at least enough for most people to be able to name them. The same can be said for Dudley Do-Right and his appearance in reruns of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. While I'm pretty sure that most people have not watched any episodes of that either, the characters are still present to a minor degree in American pop culture. In addition, in the age of smartphones, is anyone really wondering who these characters are when they can just look it up? Still, the premise of the opinion that these characters are unknown and therefore don't have a place here really is faulty. It's very clear to me that intellectual property plays a much smaller role in attracting people than just building good attractions. Super Nintendo World is great, not because it's based on the Mario IP, but because it's very cleverly done and can be enjoyed by anyone, even if they're not familiar with the source material. In contrast, the Millennium Falcon is one of the most iconic fictional vehicles ever, and yet, well, it's not a very popular attraction because it's just not very fun. The Fast and Furious franchise is one of the biggest in the world, and yet the attraction was DOA. The Guardians of the Galaxy are popular characters in film, yet it appears that no one cares at all about them in Cosmic Rewind. Have you been through the building lately, with people literally pushing doors open because they don't want to stand in the pre-show? The Guardians are not the main draw of the attraction, so much as the winning combination of an indoor roller coaster with fun music. Back to Toon Lagoon, it's also clear to me that while a lot of people do just tend to walk through the land, the rides are still immensely popular in the summer, because really, most water rides will be. There is definitely a demographic of people out there that seek out water-based attractions, and I really doubt that the relevance of Popeye has any effect on one of the best designed rapids attractions out there. The quality of the theming usually outshines the actual IP, and while Toon Lagoon may not be nearly as marketable as it was 2 decades ago, it still does very clearly have its thematic place. So, I did this video because I wanted to try something a bit different, and people do seem to enjoy my commentary, even though I am a bit afraid that I am defined by negativity sometimes. However, these are opinions and arguments that I'm tired of seeing because of how poorly thought out they are, and I figured that it would be fun to dissect exactly why they're bad. What's more concerning though, is that they are often repeated by a lot of different people who put no thought into what they're saying, passing off these opinions as their own. It's clear, just through how often I see these same opinions, that people are obviously just thoughtlessly parroting them, and part of the reason I even wanted to produce this video is because I wanted to see how influential I could be. Part of the reason for this is because I've seen people say very specific things that I have said in my videos, which makes it clear to me that I have some degree of influence in the theme park fandom, and therefore have helped shape how we think about analyzing this industry. It's a bit of a strange phenomenon to see people pass off very specific points I've made as their own thoughts, but if that's the case, then maybe I now have a chance to rectify these specific phrases and opinions that I keep seeing pop up. So let me know. Are there often any downright terrible opinions or arguments that you often see floating around online, something that would be interesting to address in the future? As always, if you haven't yet left a like on the video, that would be very much appreciated. If you haven't yet hit the subscribe button with bell notification yet either, you can do so now to be alerted to new videos as they release.